In the last video, we took a look at the best castle boss from every Mega Man game 1 through 11, so naturally it is time to take a look at the worst castle boss from every Mega Man game 1 through 11. Who could have seen this coming? Mega Man 1, the first Mega Man game ever made, has 3 castle bosses since we aren't counting Dr. Wily, so let's get right into things. The first castle boss is of course the notorious Yellow Devil, and a lot of people are probably expecting me to say this is the worst, but I'm just gonna go ahead and let you know it's not. I actually enjoy this fight a ton, but it's only because I've beaten Mega Man 1 hundreds of times, so I have his pattern engraved deeply into my psyche. The first time you play Mega Man 1, this fight is incredibly hard, but the more you practice and learn this fight, the more fun it becomes over time, so if you're playing Mega Man 1 and you happen to get stuck on the Yellow Devil, do not give up and brush off this game as bad and unfair, because I promise there is a lot of fun to be had both in Mega Man 1 itself and this boss fight. Plus, I already said the Yellow Devil was the best castle boss from this game in my last video, so that would be weird to suddenly claim he's the worst. Unless, of course, I'm lying, but you better go watch my last video to make sure. Next up, we have Clone or Copy Mega Man, which I'm honestly not a huge fan of. This fight isn't hard or anything, but it is kind of annoying and it feels a bit unoriginal since Mega Man is fighting Mega Man. Obviously, the idea of cloning Mega Man and making him fight himself is original enough, I guess, but in general, I don't like much about this fight. I like that you can kind of cheese it, but you can kind of cheese everything in Mega Man 1, so that's not really saying much. Lastly, we of course have this Bubble Maker, which is a fight more fun than it seems. There isn't much to this fight since there's basically just a few bubbles with machine contraptions inside of them that come to take your life, but I mean, it's still a cool and fun fight for the most part, so there's nothing for me to really complain about. Though I would like to know what that thing producing the bubbles looks like. I know it's different in Mega Man Powered Up, but I never count Mega Man Powered Up. Plus, I don't even think that game is canon, and even if it is technically canon, I do not recognize that game as canon or really at all, so I'm obviously not going to be considering anything from that game for this video or any video I ever make. Okay, well, maybe in the future I'll make a video on Mega Man Powered Up, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm sure you guys could have guessed that the castle boss I like the least out of all of these is of course Clone Mega Man. It's not that this boss is necessarily bad, but compared to the Yellow Devil, who is maybe the most iconic castle boss of all time, and the Bubble Boss, who is significantly more fun, Clone Mega Man did not stand a chance, so sorry Clone Mega Man, you are the worst castle boss from Mega Man 1. Mega Man 2, the second Mega Man game ever made, has a pretty obvious contender for the worst castle boss, so I'm not even gonna waste your time. It's obviously the Boo Beam, or as I like to call it, the horrible purple room boss. I spent a lot of time defending this guy in the last video because I do think it gets significantly more hate than it deserves, but like, it's obviously nowhere near as good as the Dragon Boss, the Pink Room Boss, or the Gutsman boss, so I don't want to waste your time trying to act like it might be better than one of those, so yeah, Boo Beam is of course the worst castle boss from Mega Man 2. Mega Man 3 introduced sliding to the classic Mega Man franchise, so let's slide right into dealing with these castle bosses. Do you guys get the joke? Since we aren't going to be counting the Doc robots or the Wily bosses, there are 3 castle bosses to go over, which is very appropriate considering this is Mega Man 3 after all. The first of these is the Turtle boss, and I do actually enjoy this one a good bit. It's not the most flashy castle boss we've ever seen in a Mega Man game, and it is a little weird if we're being honest, but it's fun, so I like it. Plus, turtles are pretty cool and make more appearances in Dr. Wily's castle, so this guy is a trendsetter, which has gotta count for something. I guess you could argue this fight is a little bit underwhelming since it's easy and doesn't really have a memorable design, but I enjoy this fight too much to consider it as underwhelming, so that's slander. We're not even gonna go there. Next up, we have the Yellow Devil Mark II, and while I do enjoy the Yellow Devil Mark I, I don't really like this guy. He looks weirder than the original game, and his fight does add a few new features, but there's just something about this guy that I really don't like. Maybe it's the way he's looking at me or the way he moves around or something, but I just really do not like him. The fight itself, in all honesty, isn't that bad, and it's probably even a little bit easier than the original Yellow Devil, but the main difference between this and the original is that when I play the original fight over and over again, I enjoy it just as much, if not more, every single time. Whereas this fight, I hate more and more every single time I do it, so I just can't get on board with this Yellow Devil remake, even though there is a trick to beat this guy easy every time. Lastly, we have another remake of a boss being Clone Mega Man 2. This is a pretty big improvement over the original Clone Mega Man, since this time it's more like holograms than actual cloning, and there are literally multiple levels to it, but overall, I'm still not a huge fan of this one. I like Mega Man 3 a lot, don't get it twisted, but the castle bosses in this game are just weirdly weak compared to both the rest of the series and the general standard that Mega Man 3 set. I don't think this is necessarily a bad boss, but I just don't really have fun whenever I do this fight. Plus, you can cheese this guy in numerous different ways, but I would never count that against a boss, don't worry. But anyway, which of these castle bosses is the absolute worst? Well, you might be thinking I'd choose the cloning boss, but I'm actually gonna have to go with the Yellow Devil Mark II. This was a hard choice because I generally don't enjoy either one of those bosses, but the Yellow Devil Mark II used one of my favorite castle bosses as inspiration and still managed to botch it while having a boring, stupid fight. So yeah, I'm gonna have to go with the Yellow Devil Mark II as the worst castle boss from Mega Man 3. Mega Man 4 is the first classic Mega Man game to introduce two different castles, meaning we have way more castle bosses to cover. So what are you doing? Stop wasting time, let's get started already! First, we have the Cossack Castle, and the first boss here is good old Mothra. I know this boss is super ugly, but the fight itself isn't actually all that bad. It's nothing crazy or spectacular, but it is pretty fun, and I'd say it did a fair enough job as the first castle boss we have to deal with in Mega Man 4, so there isn't really much to complain about here. Well, you know, other than the fact that it's super ugly, since we all know butterflies like this are supposed to be beautiful. After you defeat Mothra, we have the Square Machine. This fight is super unique since the boss itself is kinda its own boss room, but you also have to wait to get inside of it, making for a really interesting battle. This isn't one of my favorite fights of all time or anything, just because there's a lot of waiting, but in general, it's pretty fun for the most part. The design of this boss might not be super memorable, but that's only because its functionality is spot on. I mean, it's literally a moving room that you have to enter to do any damage, and it's hard to make one of those without making it a square like this. So, you know what, good job, Square Machine, I think you did alright. Though I guess the name could have been a little more creative if we're gonna start splitting hairs here. Next up are the Cockroach Twins, and I hate cockroaches, so these guys are already on thin ice. This fight isn't necessarily a bad one, but it can be a bit frustrating since if you make one wrong move and fall off the level, you just die because spikes kill Mega Man. Luckily, the battle isn't super difficult other than that, so you should be able to take these guys out pretty easily most of the time, but I just really wish they were not called cockroaches. Like, whoever was in charge of naming this specific castle boss needs a stern talking to from upper management. The final boss of the Cossack Castle is, of course, Dr. Cossack himself, who does not count as a Wily boss because he, isn't Dr. Wily. The fight is super easy and maybe even the easiest castle boss in this game, but I think that has something to do with the story, but you guys don't care about that, so I won't talk about it any longer. Despite being easy though, this is still a fun fight, and I like claw machines in real life, so this is of course easy on the eyes at the very least. Not much else to say about old Dr. Cossack and his claw machine though, so let's move on to the Wily Castle. The first boss of the Wily Castle is of course Metal Daddy, who we all know and love. I love Mets, you love Mets, and this guy is of course no exception, so there's no way he's going to be the worst castle boss. After that guy though is Taco Trash, who you might assume I would pick as the worst, but you know what, I actually like this guy. I don't like him as much as Metal Daddy or anything, but the fight is pretty fun and his design is actually kinda cool. Sure, it is funny looking, but there's nothing wrong with being funny looking. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that's actually a good thing. But if Taco Trash isn't the worst, then who is? Well, I'd have to give that honor to the Cockroach Twins, which is something I'm sure my subscribers saw coming because, well, I hate bugs. Joking aside, this fight isn't horrible, but Mega Man 4 just has a lot of great castle bosses, and these guys are just a little bit subpar. The fight is not awful, and I don't hate it, but compared to the other bosses, these guys just stand out as the worst. Granted, if they were in Mega Man 3 as a castle boss, they might even be the best, so I don't want you guys to think I hate anything about the Cockroach Twins other than their name. But we've got a video to continue, so the Cockroach Twins are gonna have to be officially the worst castle boss from Mega Man 4. Mega Man 5 once again continues the trend of having two entire castles to battle your way through, meaning we have a lot of castle bosses to cover, so let's get right into things. First up, we of course have the Proto Man Castle, which only has Dark Man 4 different times, so I'll try to make this quick. The first Dark Man is pretty cute and super easy to deal with, but I think that's pretty reasonable considering this is the first castle boss in the game, so he's cool with me. Dark Man 2 is just as easy, but significantly less cute, and he has no excuse for being this easy since he's no longer the first castle boss, meaning Dark Man 2 2 is already on thin ice. Darkman 3 brings up the difficulty a good bit and has a design similar to Vile both in terms of color and that shoulder cannon thing, so Darkman 3 is cool in my book. And lastly, we have Darkman 4, who brings the difficulty down a good bit from Darkman 3, but is still more challenging than Darkman 1 and 2 at the very least. Darkman 4's design is also pretty cool since he has better looking shoes and shoulder pads and stuff, but admittedly he is a bit of a letdown as far as being the final boss of Proto Man's castle goes, if you're asking me. But with them out of the way, it's time to move on to the Wily castle, and the first boss here is of course Big Pets. Big Pets is a super iconic castle boss, especially after the angry video game nerd video on glitches, but his fights can be a bit frustrating at times. I still enjoy this battle, so I'll go ahead and let you know he's not the worst, but I don't like that I have to shoot the bottom of him every single time I want to use his platforms. It's not like that's a bad thing or anything. I actually think it's good game design and whatnot, but it is a little bit annoying at the very least. Lastly, we of course have the Cirque Ring, and what is there not to love about this guy? He's funny looking, he has a fun fight, his name tells you exactly what you're getting into from the start, and he can cook a mean ribeye. I also already crowned this guy as the best castle boss from Mega Man 5, so unless I'm actively lying to you right now, there's no way this guy is gonna be the worst. Well, I guess I could be telling the truth and just be a hypocrite, but that would be dumb. This means it's down to either one of the Darkmans or Big Pets, and I'll go ahead and let you know it's not Big Pets. You know what, I'll just go ahead and say it. Darkman 2 has got to be the worst castle boss from this game. Not only is he too easy and probably the least intimidating out of all the Darkman fights, but he just feels like a copy and paste of Darkman 1. Like, at least Darkman 1 was the first boss of the castle and introduced you to what you're getting into, but this guy is just weird and doesn't really do anything unique or different from his peers, so yeah, Darkman 2 has got to be the worst castle boss from Mega Man 5. Mega Man 6 is the final classic Mega Man game to have 2 full castles that you have to take on, unless of course Capcom finally starts to read my fan mail about Mega Man 12, so let's enjoy this while we still can. Starting off with the Mr. X castle, we have Rounder 2, and if you're wondering what happened to Rounder 1, go watch my last video because I went on a whole tangent with that guy. I enjoy this fight for the most part, and it's certainly not boring, but it is a bit underwhelming when compared to a lot of the castle bosses in this game in terms of both design and gameplay. It's still a fun boss just because the game is really good all around, but Rounder 2 is already starting things off on thin ice. Alright, I'll stop saying that. I know it's getting old. After Rounder 2, we of course have the Power Piston, which I could definitely see some people claiming is even more underwhelming, but I just don't agree. Sure, the design isn't anything crazy or spectacular, but this fight is actually really fun. Mostly because you get to practice aiming your tomahawk shots, but there aren't many things in this world as satisfying as hitting every single tomahawk on Power Piston, which has gotta count for something. It is weird that this guy's main attack is making rocks fall from the sky somehow, but overall this fight is super fun, so I don't want to complain about old Power Piston for too much longer. After that guy though, we of course have the legendary Matonger Z. This guy is super cool. We all love this guy here on the Tooterp YouTube channel, so I'm not going to act like this guy even has a sliver of a chance for being the worst castle boss. He's far too awesome. The last castle boss of Mr. X's castle though is Mr. X's Big Ball. The design is a bit weird, especially considering the fact that Mr. X is inside of this big ball, but what it lacks in design it makes up for in gameplay because it is actually a fairly fun fight. Plus, I think it's really funny to just beat up poor Mr. X inside of that ball. Maybe I'm weird, but that's just really funny to me. With the Mr. X castle exploded and defeated though, let's take a look at the last 2 bosses in the Wily castle. Firstly, we have Mechazorus, who I am actually a pretty big fan of. I wouldn't say I'd like this guy as much as the dragon from Mega Man 2, but it is surprisingly pretty close. Not only does he look super cool, but his fight is also one of the more fun fights as far as castle bosses go, and he generously gives you 2 different ways to kill him, which is always nice. Though I do think it's a big pain in the patukas to actually shoot this guy's eyes due to the hitbox being so small, but I mean, skill issue, am I right? Lastly, we have this tank. I still don't think it's a tank, but I'm not going through that tangent again. This fight isn't bad or anything, but it's certainly the most underwhelming castle boss in this game, so it's probably going to end up being the worst. Like, the fight isn't boring, I guess, but none of the fights in this game are boring. Plus, someone in my comment section said this guy was just a reskin of the Gorilla mini-boss from Plant Man stage, which I am inclined to believe. I didn't fact check this, but it's believable enough for me, so I'm just gonna go ahead and declare this generously named tank as the worst castle boss from Mega Man 6. With the NES games taken care of, it is of course time to take a look at the rest of the franchise, but here's a fun fact. Did you know that 5 out of the next 6 of these Mega Man games all have a reincarnation of the Yellow Devil? Isn't that just great? Mega Man 7 is the first classic Mega Man game on the Super Nintendo, and it only has 2 castle bosses that we're going to consider. And before you guys start, I read the comments of the last video, and I know most of you guys were all like, "But Tooterp, are you stupid? Have you ever played Mega Man 7? You forgot about Haniad 2 and Base. You know nothing about Mega Man." So let me clarify. First of all, Base is a mid-boss, which is why I did not count him. I am not counting mini-bosses or mid-bosses in this video, but maybe we can do that in the future. But more importantly, I've always thought that Haniad, whatever you call this thing, was a Wily boss because it looks like a Wily machine. But apparently this is the only skull-themed castle boss in the entire series that is not piloted by Wily, which really threw me off. So no, I did not forget about this boss, but I did assume it was a Wily boss based on both its appearance and boss fight, so I didn't count it. It may have ended up being the best castle boss if I did count it, but as Kanye West once said, I guess we'll never know. I'm still not going to count it in this video just for consistency's sake, but even if I did, do you really think this boss would be the worst? No, it wouldn't. Anyway, getting back into things, we do only have 2 castle bosses to go over, so let's start with Guts Man. This is a cool fight, it's fun, it has multiple ways to go about it, and more importantly, it's Guts Man. And the second fight is the Gamerizer Turtle that uses RNG to make your life miserable, so yeah, let's just cut to the chase. The turtle is worse. This boss fight isn't that bad, but compared to the Guts Man fight, it is really annoying. Plus, I have bad luck, so getting good RNG is something that almost never happens to me, and because of that, I'm gonna have to officially label the Gamerizer as the worst boss from Mega Man 7. Mega Man 8 is a game surrounded by controversy, unlike me of course. This game has 3 castle bosses though, so let's get right into things. The first castle boss is of course a Titamino, and spoiler alert, I think this guy is super lame. I'm not gonna go as far as to say it's the worst for Mega Man 8 just yet, but he's definitely a good contender. Not only does he just generally look weird and stupid, but this fight as a whole is also stupid, as I'm sure you could have guessed. It's not stupid as in hard, just to be clear. This fight is actually comically easy, it's just boring. You literally just kick a ball into the correct area and then eventually you win. But that's not fun, unless you like Mega Man Soccer, in which case I suggest you go see a doctor of some kind. Next up we have Bike King, who is also a pretty lackluster fight. The main problem with this battle is that it's an auto-scroller, which is pretty weird for a castle boss fight. Sure, I guess you can make the argument that the Dragon boss for Mega Man 2 is also an auto-scroller at the beginning, and therefore this boss should be just as cool, but like, come on, we know that's not the same thing. I don't necessarily hate this fight, so once again, I can't call it the worst just yet, but I certainly don't enjoy it. Lastly though, we have the Green Devil. This is potentially the easiest devil fight in the entire Mega Man series, but it's surprisingly not boring. It actually has a decent bit of variety, and it makes for a fairly fun fight, meaning it is not going to be the worst castle boss. But what the H is the worst castle boss? Well, this may or may not come as a shock to you guys, but the worst castle boss is gonna have to be a Titamino. The Bike King is of course annoying, but a Titamino is straight up stupid. I at least think the Bike King has some creativity with being an auto-scroller and all, but the creativity a Titamino has is wasted on a terrible and boring gimmicky boss fight. Maybe if this guy was a mini-boss in Clown Man stage instead of a literal castle boss, it would be a different story, but it's not, so a Titamino is officially the worst castle boss from Mega Man 8. Oh yeah, you already know what time it is, it's Rockman and Forte time. I'm actually going to keep this entry extra short because most of the castle bosses in this game are just King and his different iterations, except for one boss which happens to be the return of a Titamino. I'm sure you know where this is going. Yeah, I'd say this version of a Titamino is at least better than the one from Mega Man 8 just because this one isn't boring, but this one is still stupid and frustrating, so unfortunately it's going to have to be the worst. I mean, it's not like any of the King bosses would ever come close to being worse than this thing, which is why I kept this entry so short, so yeah, Titamino once again is the worst castle boss from Rockman and Forte. Mega Man 9 brings us back to 8-bit, but it only has 3 castle bosses, which I guess does make sense considering 3 is the square root of 9 after all. Firstly, we have the Spike Pushers. These guys are pretty goofy looking, but overall, I think it's a pretty fun fight. It can be stressful having to micromanage everything, but I guarantee you'll be able to do it if you're a Tooterp subscriber. Joking aside, this fight isn't bad at all, but it also doesn't stand out as being incredibly fun. I think there's also a Kirby boss fight that's almost exactly the same as this, but since I don't remember for sure, I'm not gonna dock any points for originality. But if you want to see some more Kirby videos in the future, let me know down in the comment sections, because I did used to make Kirby videos a little bit, so you should also check those out. Next up, we have Mega Mecha Shark, or as I like to call him. This guy is super cool and one of my favorite castle bosses of all time, so he's obviously not going to be the worst castle boss. But let's take a second to appreciate this catch. Do you get it? I said catch because... Lastly, we of course have the Twin Devil boss, and I'll go ahead and let you know I am not a fan of these guys. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they are a devil boss, because as you could see in the last video, I actually enjoy devil bosses quite a bit, but these guys are just something else. They're really stupid and annoying. This is also one of the only devil bosses to have a bottomless pit accompanying the boss fight, which is just exactly what a devil boss needs. Am I right, gamers? Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This guy is the worst boss. I don't necessarily hate this fight in general, but when compared to the other castle bosses from this game, this one is by far my least favorite. So of course, that means the Twin Devil is gonna have to officially be crowned as the worst castle boss from Mega Man 9. Mega Man 10, or as I like to call it, Mega Man 9 2, takes more inspiration from Mega Man 9 by also having 3 castle bosses for us to go over. The first of these bosses is of course the Weapons Archive, which is one of the coolest concepts for a boss I've ever seen. It is actually spread out between 3 different fights throughout the first stage, which is a bit weird, but with an idea as cool as this, I don't mind. The fight can be a bit tricky at times, but it never feels unfair and it's fun the whole way through. The only problem with this boss at all is the fact that there is no Rockman and Forte reference, but someone in my comment section actually pointed out that Dr. Wily canonically hates King, which is why he wouldn't want to use any of his robots, and that's an explanation I'm willing to accept, meaning there's literally no way this is going to be the worst castle boss. Next up, we have Mr. Krabs. Oh yeah, this fight, if anything, is maybe a bit underwhelming and generic, but I actually do enjoy this one quite a bit. Sure, it's not my favorite castle boss of all time, but it is fun, and I feel like it at least hits average, so yeah, not much to complain about here. Lastly, we once again have a devil boss with the Block Devil. Again, I'm not gonna leave you in suspense during this entry because this guy is by far my least favorite castle boss from this game. I don't want you guys to think I hate these devil bosses, but these last 2 are just awful. I understand why Capcom wanted to do something with a devil boss, since this was kind of like a reboot and they wanted to pander to the nostalgia of fans, but like, why this, Capcom? Why? I do enjoy how it is at least creative and not something like, I don't know, the Yellow Devil Mark III or something, but I hate this guy even more than the Twin Devils. The Twin Devils were at least tolerable and a cool spin, but this guy is so far beyond being a devil boss, it's almost unrecognizable. The only thing that lets you know this is a devil boss is the fact that you have to wait far too long in between your opportunities to attack, and that sucks. That's the worst part of any devil boss. So I'm sure you could have guessed this, but I am officially declaring the Block Devil boss as the worst castle boss from Mega Man 10. Mega Man 11 is a great game that's very amazing with mediocre music, but that has nothing to do with the castle bosses, so let's get right into it. There are actually only 2 castle bosses in this game, but like for real this time. It's the Yellow Devil Mark III, How Original, and Malvern. If you've seen the last video, you already know I actually enjoy Malvern for the most part, because both his fights and design are great, and I think that he's underrated, so the Yellow Devil Mark III is gonna have to be the worst. I hate to have 3 devil bosses in a row being the worst castle bosses, but like, it is what it is, I guess. This fight isn't all that bad, and it's certainly not terrible, but it is one of the worst iterations of the Yellow Devil in general. I would say it's better than the Yellow Devil Mark II at least, but so is pretty much every castle boss ever. The main problem with this boss fight though is that it simply takes too long to kill because it has way too much health. I've seen lots of different people say that they hate this boss and that it just isn't fun in general, and while I wouldn't go that far, I do at least see why people think that. I also do appreciate that Capcom brought the Yellow Devil back straight up for another iteration instead of making some weird Twin Devil or Block Devil boss, but as a whole, I still think this boss fight missed the mark. So unfortunately for our old pal, the Yellow Devil, I'm gonna have to officially label him as the worst castle boss from Mega Man 11. The Yellow Devil Mark III, that is. The Yellow Devil Mark I, he's cool, and he's not in Mega Man 11, so why would I mean that? I hope you didn't think I meant that. Why am I clarifying? Well, those were the worst castle bosses from every Mega Man game, 1 through 11. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and Capcom, if you're watching this video, I hope you've gotten the message that I've been subtly trying to convey the last couple of videos. Stop remaking the Yellow Devil! Stop! Stop doing it! We get it! You like the Yellow Devil, but enough is enough, for Pete's sake! Stop remaking him! My goodness!